apologize a little bit in advance today. It's a really effective pattern with an unfortunate name. This is called the 2-bit hooker. Pretty sure we get the 2-bit because, as you can see, we've got 2 tungsten beads on the front of this pattern, and we're going to want to tie it pretty skinny. It's going to drop really fast in the water with those 2 beads on there. I'm just going to use a sheer 14-aught in olive. That's going to be the color of the body. You can do this in a lot of different colors. I've got a size 14 in the vise here. And I'll just get that thread kind of started. Not building up much of a taper, but maybe a tiny little bit of a taper. And just kind of take it back to where I want my tails to be tied in. For the tails, we're just going to use a piece of Indian Saddle hackle. I've already pulled a feather off. Kind of like that. It's a good looking feather. It's mottled. It's got kind of light tips on the ends. I'm going to be using this for tail, but I'm also going to be using it for a couple of legs as we move up towards the front. So I'm just going to strip out, probably 7 or 8 of these fibers. And then I'm going to measure them for length before I secure them onto my hook. I want them to be probably, I like them a little bit shorter than the length of the hook, so I'm going to err on the side of short rather than long. We'll get a couple thread wraps in there. And that's looking just fine. So I'm going to go ahead, because we are building a little bit of a taper here, I do want to keep some of these butt ends in place because they'll add that extra bulk that we're looking for. That will just help us not take quite as many thread wraps in order to get our taper. So I just went ahead and trimmed those out. I'm going to go ahead and hold that tail behind the bend of the hook in place as I just kind of move forward, clean that up a little bit. Not overly worried. We're going to make a few passes back and forth here. But now we're going to come back, keeping those tails on the very top of the hook here. And you're not going to crank on this, but it doesn't hurt to put some pressure on it. So here we go. That's going to work out just fine for me. So next I'm actually going to tie in some black thread. So I've got a bobbin of black thread here. And it's going to be the ribbing on this fly. So and we're going to transition to that color as well as we finish off the fly. So I'm just going to get that kind of secured down a little bit, and then I'll just pull it backwards so I don't have nearly as much that I need to cut off. If I do it right, I won't need to cut any of it off. And then I'm just going to come back down to the bend, secure it where I want this abdomen to start. Be right about there. And I'm just going to let this bobbin kind of dangle, hang kind of out of the way a little bit. And we're just going to work our way back up towards the front. We already have a little bit of a taper going. I want to get a little bit more bulk here behind that second bead, just with some thread wraps, and then I'll just go up and back a couple of times just to give us that little bit of a taper. So I gave myself just a little bit of extra length of this material just so I can hang it on my bobbin cradle here. It just makes it a little bit easier for me. Then I'm going to grab my bobbin of black. That's our tail material. And I'm going to give this quite a few spins because I really want it to cord up as much as I possibly can. Because I want this to be a rib, and if I don't cord this up by spinning the thread around, then I'm going to end up with just kind of fibers of thread spread across that body instead of more of a distinct looking rib. So just make sure you take your time to do that. Go ahead and take a wrap. Then I'm just going to take kind of loose wraps moving up the body there. And you'll note that this taper or this rib is very light. You can hardly see it at all. We're going to finish this off with a little bit of UV resin, and that will help that black kind of pop out a little bit more, but it is very subtle. And there's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with having like a subtle ribbing on your fly. So we're back up there. My bobbin cradle got ahead of me and decided to go ahead and break loose, which is just fine because I'm right behind those beads where I want it to be. So I'm just going to take a few wraps of my olive thread now. So I'm actually tying with two bobbins, right? You can see the thread from both of those. And all I'm doing here is I'm securing down that black thread, and that's what we're going to use for the rest of the fly. So I'm going to give myself a little bit of extra thread, and I'm going to grab my whip finisher, and we're going to whip finish the olive thread. We're done with it. So at this point we're going to put a little bit of dubbing on it, and we're going to use some superfine, and this is a mahogany color. It's a nice rich dark brown color. So I'm just going to grab a wisp. I'm going to probably go back to this dubbing a couple of times as we finish off this fly. And I'm just going to finger dub this on my thread here. Get that slid up a little bit. I'm going to, just right behind that second bead, we're just going to build up a little bit of bulk. So next we're going to tie in a piece of this large Mirage pearl tinsel. We're going to use this as a wing case, so I'm just going to secure this right back here behind this second bead. Make sure it's kind of right over the center of the hook, which it is. I will go ahead and come on in and clip the excess here off with my scissors. And we're going to be putting some dubbing down here, so that will actually clean that up a little bit. Just give myself a little bit of extra thread and tighten that dubbing down on my thread here. Just kind of scoot it up. And we are just going to create a little dubbing ball back here, nearly the same size as the other two beads. And from there, I'm going to go across and in between those two beads. I am going to grab just a tiny little bit more because I'm going to put legs in there. And if I have a little bit more bulk in there, those legs won't pinch out or splay out nearly as much. So I'm okay putting a little bit of extra dubbing in between these two beads here. It'll actually work to our advantage when we move on to the legs on the pattern. So there we are. We've got our thread situated right in between the two beads. We're going to go back to our Indian saddle hackle, and I'm going to grab me a little bunch of these for the legs. Once I have that bunch kind of out, I'm going to tie the first bunch on closest to me on the me side of the hook, and I am going to take a fairly loose wrap initially and then kind of crank it down a little bit better with my second wrap. And then I'll check for length. I want them to go, just about beyond the dubbing ball there, and so those actually ended up about where I would normally like them. Just for security's sake, I'm going to take a wrap of thread on the other side of that material, and then I'll just quickly reach back over to my saddle hackle again to grab my next set of legs for the lens side and get those in place. And try to get those pretty close to the right length. We may have to do some adjusting, but it's okay. I'm used to doing that. So we'll take, again, a kind of a loose wrap just to kind of get it so kind of put into place there. Then I'm going to take a look at where they are. I can adjust when I just have a couple of wraps. You can do quite a lot of adjusting. So now I'm going to just make these guys a little bit shorter. And we've got a wonderful mess kind of going on here, but that's okay. That's what it'll do. Now I'm just going to go ahead and kind of secure everything down. And with that, I'm just going to sneak in with my scissors, and we're going to cut the butt ends off. So So just be really careful that you're not cutting the legs themselves off, but just the butt ends. Got one little guy who wants to be out front. Good for him. All right. So we've got our legs on either side now. And next I'm going to take this wing case and I'm just going to bring it over the top, and that's going to help us keep those legs kind of split. I just want that nice and centered over that back bead. I'll just take a couple of wraps just to lock that fellow into place. Make sure he's centered where I want him to be. I'm going to go ahead and tighten that down with a few wraps. I'm going to pull it backwards. Take a few wraps on the other side of it here. And with that, I can come in with my scissors. And if you actually just make a small little cut on one side of it, it'll break itself right off. So now at a point we can just go ahead and whip finish. Just take a few wraps. It's okay if you've got a little bit of a black collar there. That's not going to hurt anything. Pull that nice and snug. I'll turn my vise a little bit so I can use the back end of my whip finisher. And we can detach our thread at this point. Here's how we're looking. Great looking nymph. I'm going to grab myself some UV resin, and I only want this really on the top. I'm not going to go around the entire body here. I'm just going to get myself a little dab of it. And let's go ahead, put some right over this wing case here. And I'm going to drag some of it right down over the top of the body. Not all the way around, but just over the top of the body there. You want to make sure you get a nice coat going on either side of that mirage. So you may need to kind of turn your vise a little bit just to make sure that you've got the edges in pretty good order there. I'm just using some Solaris thick. I like it because, well, it kind of stays in place. So I'm able to kind of move it around the way that I want, get the coverage that I want, and then I can hit it with my torch to harden it. So that's all we're doing here is we're going to hit this with our UV torch. That's going to cure that resin for us and give us a nice shiny back while keeping those legs swept down and backwards a little bit. And again, you can tie this in lots of different colors. You could do red, really just about anything that you want. I've seen brown as well, but great nymph pattern, the 2-bit hooker. Give it a shot.